Okay, so actually I was talking, but I realized I was on mute. Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I guess some people might still be streaming in. We have some special guests today from the Netherlands and France. Tom, you know Antonia, of course. Mm. We're going to be doing some work with them the next months and just to help them catch up with a lot of the material that's been uncovering um, these last years. It seems amazing to just have them here. Um, I'm also waiting for Paul from Manila to be streaming in. He wants to share a little bit of what they've been unraveling in the project in bringing inner dance to the prisons in Manila, which has really been amazing. A lot's actually been happening there, and we started to speak about it here in this space many months ago. So it's actually gonna be interesting to listen to that. But right now the focus is in London. A lot's been happening in London since last year. Um, so maybe there are some connections with Tom bringing up this possibility. I often get these messages from people asking for conversation, holding some questions, holding ideas. And very often, I actually have a hard time conversing in a private space because somehow I feel like this is meant to be shared somehow. The conversation needs to be shared. So either the speaker would probably benefit from being able to speak to a larger group. Probably the speaker would benefit from listening to a larger group because the speaker isn't actually just a speaker. The speaker is speaking from a collective space. So probably what Tom is holding, as always or as per usual, is not simple. Okay, the other Paul is coming through. We could welcome him first, I think, before going into London, because I think what's happening in Manila is more concise. It's more simple. Just wait for him to connect. Okay, so yeah, Paul is in. I want to introduce him. So Paul is not exactly someone we would call an inner dance facilitator, and I think this is something that would be interesting for us because um, he didn't really have that much inner dance experience, but he's basically holding what we would definitely call an inner dance journey. And this is particularly with a focused audience, mostly with people we would call people deprived of liberty. Some people call them prisoners, inmates, people in jails. Now we need to speak to it in more politically correct terms. So Paul and his partner Rosa and a few other people have been working with PDLs, and they've been taking inner dance as that technology, whether it be people laying down or sitting up, people with eyes closed or with eyes open. A lot of things have been happening in the prison, and um, like Fanny, when she was passing through Manila, sat down with Paul to show him how the noise app works and how the wave works. So even without Paul having ever have laid down to an inner dance workshop, he's actually holding some very interesting inner dance spaces in the jails within the program they call Laya Digital Creators. And apparently, this program has a chance of spreading out to different jail systems. So Studios Mundos is very supportive of this work, and the donations that come through the space basically go to several programs happening around the world. This is one of them, providing them access to transport for some of the former inmates who might be going through some of the programs, art materials, and some other basic necessities that allows Rosa and Paul to be able to perform this on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. So maybe this would be a chance for us to listen to what's been happening, and also maybe get to ask questions and what's been happening there. I want to share maybe my screen for now quickly. Rosa just sent me let's see. Rosa just sent me like a PDF that I can send to you guys after the call. And this basically shows the work that the PDLs have been outputting, have been creating. And I've been watching these drawings, these paintings since last year, and the themes have been going deeper and deeper, actually. They've been going more and more honest, more and more interesting, wild, intriguing, evoking, provoking. There's a lot there. And I think especially when they began to incorporate inner dance, where there's no separation between art, words, the movement, and yeah, all these different modes of thinking, feeling, moving. There's something there, I think, that's piquing the interest of many people. And this is very much like in the system. Like, look at this one. This this just struck me. I was reading. I wish you could read this in Tagalog. Maybe you can have them translate these. So yes, everything from the positive to the cathartic to the hopeful to the whatever it is. There's a lot that these PDLs are able to speak from a confined space. So somehow people don't need to be confined in these very crowded, very harsh, life-threatening conditions where people are always in this sympathetic fight or flight state. So I spoke to Paul when we passed through Manila a couple of weeks ago, and he's been experimenting with even words in relation to the sounds, in relation to the images. So there's something about the brain and the different brain lobes, from that which registers sound, images, emotions. So Paul's been experimenting intuitively. I don't know if he knows what he's doing, but he's picking up these random books that he might find from the jail or from wherever, and he's been reading them lines from books, and that I think has shifted the energy even more so. So in general, a lot of the insights that Laya has been picking up on, we've been applying actually to school systems. So as we develop curriculums founded in inner dance, a lot of the experimentations from Laya actually influences what's happening across the world, across the Philippines. So Paul, I don't know if you're awake. I think it's maybe super late there in the Philippines, but we wanted to just interact with you. If you could maybe unmute and do a video call with us, be interested to just hear a little bit about what you've been going through. Are you there?
Hello?
Hey,
Hi.
Paul. Yeah.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Maybe a good
Hi.
question would be, in the beginning, you were quite insecure about doing this. You felt that you don't know anything about inner dance, but watching where this is at, it feels like you've gained a lot of traction and confidence in a way that, like in the past, Paul was dependent on Rosa to do the inner dance. But then sitting down with Fanny just a little bit in Manila, I think Paul had really just realized into itself that like he himself can help to hold this space. So if you could tell us a little bit about the story of what you've been doing, what you've been learning, what do you feel about this? Okay, go ahead.
Hi guys. Uh, so where do I begin? I, I think I picked a lot of what I learned from Fanny and you, Pai, from the conversations we've had, and also Rosa, of course. So I guess I was following Fanny's lead when maybe trying to emulate what I maybe picked up from her, what she did during her session in Manila City Jail, and maybe tried to improvise a little bit. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier when I showed the pictures, how I do it is just have them lie down and maybe listen for a bit, then let them do their thing, whether they want to draw or not. And yeah, I don't initially I didn't know how I don't really know how the reading would affect them. I picked up um, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein from the library they had there. I thought it was the book was I don't know, maybe a little apt since you know Frankenstein, the dead guy, gets hit by the lightning, energy courses through him. I thought it was there might be a connection between how sound being in itself a kind of energy would maybe give life to something inside our minds and maybe give us a bit more life, something like that. That's why I thought it was, it might be interesting to read from it. Um, Also, the other book, I don't know how it affects them in general, but um, I guess it sort of it does have a kind of influence since after they um, listen, or maybe I don't know how, maybe they get influenced a little bit and they get more interested about um, the subject matter. I don't know, maybe hopefully I imagine they would pick up some ideas and think about the story, or in relation to maybe something from their past, or something from what they're going through at the moment, something like that, I guess.
Mm, yeah, I think it's
So
brilliant. It's amazing. How did you get inspired by this thought? I mean, when did you think that this could, work?
I'm not really sure, like maybe some movies like Clockwork Orange, you know, and like that part where I mention, sometimes I would mention some words to them, I think I got that from you when we were during our last meeting when you said something about the power of words. So I thought I'd try it. You know, maybe
Mm,
that helps. I'm not sure. Some of them maybe I don't know how it affects them individually.
mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, because this is new as well. But definitely based on the art and the themes that have been coming up, there's been a radical shift the last weeks. So I think we're just gonna be interested in how this evolves or unravels. Does anyone have maybe some questions or just some ideas for Paul? I mean, anyone interested in this project could always connect with him and Rosa. They took a break and they're only going back into the program recently. So I think we'll have a chance to interact with this um, quite a bit. Um, we do have some ideas on what happens to the brain when sound, art in the visual sense, and words start to connect in the brain. Because a lot of people are experimenting with just the sound. Okay, what does vibration do? So it's already quite brilliant to help these PDLs process their emotions and their psyche by expressing in terms of painting. But then now to bring the power of words through the written word or the spoken word, um, I think there's a lot there that could be picked up on. Okay, so does anyone have any questions for now for Paul? We could do that later as well. So you can just let it come. Tom, we could go to you now. I think the big intention today is to go into a conversation with you. So if you could give a really short context as to what you need to bring into conversation inside and outside so that you can hold this panel next week. Um, could you talk about this?
Yeah. I guess first I would say that I'm also interested in the prison project and how that's going. And I think that's quite cool what's happening over there. We think about how we could get something like that into facilities here in the UK, but maybe that's a little bit later down the line. But yeah, I'd be curious to hear a bit more of how that all came to pass. One of the things that I was wanting to talk and listen to today was I had a conversation with Pi privately on Sunday. Lisa and I are going to be at this well weekend, and we started doing these regular sessions at this place called the Four. And the Four is kind of like a co-working gym space. So it's like a co-working studio, and then it has yoga classes, some alternative things. One of the I guess like the managers of it came to one of Lisa and I's classes, I think through Lisa's contact, and decided she wanted to put inner dance in this place. And so we're going to be doing inner dance sessions at this place in King's Cross in London, which is it's kind of like the tech hub of London. So all of the big companies are there, like Meta is there, YouTube is there, Google as part of YouTube is there. And the company, the building that we're in is surrounded, like we're surrounded by DeepMind offices. And so DeepMind, for people who don't know, is one of the foremost AI research and developers in the world at the minute. There's like DeepMind, OpenAI, and then there's some other ones. But DeepMind pretty big. And what I was told by Hannah, who is the organizer of this Well Weekend, which is going to have a few celebrities speaking on it, including Lisa and me as well, is that there might be some deep mind executives in the space. And I think because we're in the deep mind building, the chances are over the next few months that we do these classes and beyond, it's working out, there's going to be a lot of kind of tech guys coming in to have these experiences. And so what I'm really conscious of, and particularly, I guess, coming from the UK, I really like the mystical side of things. And I think mysticism as a language is interesting, and it has a certain power with the brain. There's something that sticks with it and appeals to the brain in a way that's different to, say, science as a language. What I'm quite conscious of in the UK is that unless those two things tend to be kind of separate. It's like you have to be able to speak to the scientific mind or the technological mind in fairly clear and concise terms in order for people to not write you off as some fringe hippie, which happens all the time. And so I was wanting to ask Pi some general questions about things that I don't feel particularly clear on when I'm explaining them. And during our conversation the other day, I had ChatGPT open while I was listening to Pi, and there's some certain concepts that came in, and I fed them into ChatGPT and said, explain this to me as if I was 11 years old. And ChatGPT said, sure, okay, and came up with these explanations. I think what was one of the things that he mentioned? It was Fourier transform. So it started out by saying the Fourier transform is a mathematical tool that allows us to analyze the frequency components of a signal or function, decomposes a function of time in brackets or space into a representation in the frequency domain. And I was just thinking, I need to I need something a little easier to digest for me at the moment. So what I'm want to try to do is to take some of these concepts and refine them and simplify them down to a level where I can speak about them with confidence and not kind of venture too far outside of my own remit, so I can be solid in my explanations. So if I'm speaking to tech minds, and particularly people who are working with AI systems and studying the brain a lot, like I want to make sure that what I'm saying is interesting and relevant and real to them, and not speak about things in kind of energetic or mystical language, even though on a personal level I do find a lot of value in that. And symbolic language as well, I like that, but I want to try to get the tech and the scientific side like grounded as an understanding in me. So I was saying the other day to Pi that I feel fairly comfortable talking about the nervous system, at least through the kind of the polyvagal lens, like upregulation, downregulation, sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze, parasympathetic, all of that. That's kind of like my turf. I feel quite comfortable there. I'm talking about the brainwave states as well, from delta right the way through to gamma and flow states, and what's happening there feels fairly comfortable for me as well. Sleep cycles, I feel quite comfortable with, and REM and lucid dreaming, but I do want to get a little bit more clarity on that and just kind of refresh some understanding around sleep cycles, and say like the dream states that we work with in inner dance, and why people experience visions, and then we talked about maybe having a bit of a discussion on music theory. It's just like some quick basic pointers on music theory, and I was particularly interested to revisit the brain breath blood thing that Pi was talking about. And then one of the main parts that I was interested in was what's happening to which parts of the brain with the sound, like which are the parts of the brain that are affected by certain sounds and why that's important. It's like, why does that matter? And then I suppose as an extension of that, it's like, why do people move? You know, what's the movement part of? And I have some ideas around that. I can speak relatively comfortable around about that in a kind of a symbolic sense. And I've been thinking about this idea, I guess, in the last year or few years about Peter Levine from Somatic Experiencing talks about trauma cycles completing themselves, and he's quite specific on movement and how when a trauma is wanting to complete itself, it can complete itself through a movement. And my theory or my idea is that that's kind of happening spontaneously in inner dance, and that your body is learning to move in a way that's kind of completing these trauma cycles, perhaps. But it's certainly learning to move in a different way that, like, I'm conscious of is not a way that I had necessarily understood as a movement before. Like, I remember waking up in a gong bath in Bali, and my hands were doing this, this particular movement, and I didn't really. This was after I'd done a lot of inner dance stuff already, but I'd got kind of largely just got a lot of visions, and there was I'd done a lot of movement stuff, but part of it was kind of voluntary. I will just move my body and go with what's happening. But this gong bath, it was like I was like out, I was asleep, and I woke up and my hands were moving on their own. And so that was kind of interesting. It's like that was something that I was wanting to look at maybe a bit more with the movement. But there's probably going to be a lot to fit into, I guess, like an hour and a half or 2 hours. But yeah, it was those main topics of the brain, the different areas of the brain that sound affects, and a little bit of music theory. And yeah, just have a kind of a conversation, see if we can extract out some simple, refined, grounded understandings that feels comfortable to explain to people.
Yeah, cool. So thank you. Yeah, this is actually quite nice for us to be brought into to this part of London where you're at. When I do talks, especially to audiences like these, my starting point is normally to create an outline. And normally when we think of outlines, it's like bullet points, but that kind of outline doesn't really work always within an inner dance conversation. The outline looks more like a mandala or a mind map. It's quite nonlinear. So to come to an understanding of this work that we do, there has to be some cross-conceptual thinking involved. It's like bringing many concepts together, and it's like a puzzle. They need to fit in with each other. The danger in that kind of thinking is when we let's say verbalize terms of reference that are unfamiliar, abstracts that aren't going, people can't Google that while you're speaking. You can't just have ChatGPT there while you're going into a verbal process. The concepts that need to cross with each other need to be quite simple, yet they need to be comprehensive in a way that when you speak about it, it's because it's known enough, not just by you but others, that this is something quite relevant, deep, and resonant. So I remember a couple of months ago we brought up this concept of the theory of mind. I don't know if you remember, Tom. Like, theory of mind explains something automatic that happens in the mind of a listener whenever we are interacting with another person or with a group of people. There has to be some empathy as to what's going on inside them for me to filter out what I would say, right? So there has to be a strong theory of mind in this case, because there's a whole bunch of topics, and there needs to be that putting it all together So I'm in the same space that you are. I'm talking to these same audiences, educators, businessmen, people in government, doctors, and though a lot of topics are alike, depending on who I'm talking to, I need a theory of mind just to sense what needs to come together, and what questions are being held that are relevant, that may present some gaps both in the spiritual and the scientific that inner dance seems to contribute to or offer. So when we talk about, for example, music, okay, music is interesting not just for facilitators and healers. Music is interested for scientists right now, and there are now big questions coming up as to what is a music theory that can fit into the cognitive sciences that reveals something about emotions, something about attention, something about the right brain, something about intuition. There's a lot of gaps there. So we're actually putting together contributions as to the effect of music in the brain and the body and the mind that's quite new. So that's a possible entry point. So now people talk about entrainment, right? Like that the brain and the mind, the body can get entrained by external stimuli in the environment. We can get entrained by the food that we eat, by the sounds happening outside. When you do look at the sciences as well on entrainment, there's not actually that much explanations yet on why and how the body gets entrained by everything from the light and dark cycle to temperature to food. Inner dance contributes to this as well, possibly because we've gone into very extreme entrainment events. And sound has been the most powerful entrainment device. It's not the only one for inner dance. It's also the way we touch and hold people, the way we position bodies, the way we speak certain words. But there's something about the way we layer music that seems to affect the autonomic and the circadian rhythms. So you can make a knowledge claim about this, and when you do need at least some basic notions that can substantiate the claim that music next to it could be what comes after psychedelics. Psychedelics assisted therapy is now quite big, especially here in Europe. And now it doesn't take much for me to go into conversations with medical practitioners to state that, okay, the chemicals are inside. And if we tap into the drugs, the chemicals that are already inside, why would we need to ingest external chemicals? So we know this to be true. Proof of concept, this has been happening across the world for the last, in my experience, 16 years, 17 years. It's been happening a lot longer. The psychedelics, breath work, shamanism of all types, Kundalini process. I think to centralize the conversations, we need to understand, okay, like for example, in the brain, where does it all come together? Where does it all come together? When you say we can trigger the brain, that's a general statement. Like how, right? The brain functions would be everything from emotions to motor functions, attention, memory, language, and then all of these can be mapped out. What I've been interested in, and it took me a long time to actually figure this out. It's not actually that many parts of the brain that trigger everything else that are these manifestations that are particularly to do with the autonomic nervous system. So I think we need to point out that when we conduct these journeys that creates these mechanisms, these effects, a lot of it has something to do with autonomy or the autonomic nervous system. For that to be relevant, then we need to honor body wisdom whereas intelligence is normally to do with verbal intelligence or cognition. There's something about body-based intelligence. The word embodiment seems to be coming up hugely, even in the sciences, like in the cognitive sciences. We're realizing that the body holds a wisdom that isn't always knowable by what we call the mind. So if you could put all these together, like line them up, okay, entrainment happens, how, why? Okay, it's something to do with the nervous system. Then what part of the nervous system does it trigger? I've been looking at the one part of the brain that maybe affects almost everything to do with the autonomic nervous system. There's one part of the brain that affects all of these, and this is the hypothalamus. I would ask anyone, including you, to look into that, because it does actually simplify many things. The hypothalamus is responsible for thermoregulation, for emotion, thirst and hunger, sexual activity, growth, metabolism. Like when people feel cold, the hypothalamus is responsible for that. When they shiver, blood pressure rising up and falling down, the hypothalamus is in charge of that. Pain, the sleep-wake cycle, dreaming is affected by the hypothalamus. Memory is implicated there. Motor functions are implicated there. Learning, arousal, energy balance, immunity, all of those actually begin in one place. So what's interesting is the hypothalamus is very easily affected by music, by vibrations, by sound, by words, and mostly what we call fear or trust. It is hugely responsible for opening things up or contracting things. I think that's a really simple notion. It's already quite amazing to have that revelation, but I think to bring a more long-term conversation around this, I think we would need to think about not just the trigger mechanisms that's random or spontaneous. There's something about rhythmicity in these mechanisms. There's a rhythm. It's partly explainable through the circadian rhythms, but beyond that, I think there are many rhythms that allows the energy to rise and fall according to possibly entrainment. My problem with entrainment as a concept is it's not exactly what's happening right now. I think what's happening right now is there's an untraining of what has been entrained over a long period of time. So to hone this into England, to the UK or to London, a lot of circadian rhythm science is actually coming out of Oxford. It's coming out of the UK. Like a lot of the scientists who are trying to study the sleep-wake cycle are from that country. I'm reading this literature since last year. I'm trying to listen to the lectures, and I can listen to it. It's interesting. There are many interesting things there. I'm partly bored by it as well because my experience of sleep and wake, as I've often spoken about when I was living in the island, it was messed up, like meaning I wasn't sleeping even. And when I observe people going into the process long term, they don't exhibit or perform the same sleep-wake cycle that people are, that's supposed to be normal, like anything above or beyond 7 hours a night is it. Have run healing centers, an eco village for a long time. I know that this is not exactly true for people going into deep energy work, because sleep, just like wake, is actually just an energy management process. So when we put forward the more the less obvious insights and observations that happens in the work that we do, the vulnerable thing that happens is we're actually quite controversial. We're vulnerable because a lot of the things that we're experiencing in the process is outside of the norm, outside of the obvious. Everything to do with food, with sleep, with thinking, with emotion, with the way the body moves or doesn't move, the dimensions that we go into. So my style or my preference has been to look for one concept that would allow me to not trigger people so that they want to run away. They just try to get away from me as far and as quick as possible. And I think that concept is philosophical in nature. It's explainable in science and spirituality both, and it has something to do with time perception, the science of time perception. So I remember an inner dance we did, Dom, in Ubud in Bali, in Clara's house. I'm sure you remember this, when you had this deep experience of seeing, you called it like crouching tiger, hidden dragon China, like ancient China, and at the same time you saw this, the tube, the subway train in London, and you were kind of confused because you saw them both at the same time, and the way I remember your description, they were hipped together, like they were the same place, yet you were able to see them at the same time, like there was a split, not just in time but also in space. I think this concept is interesting. It's provocative. We've been speaking about time in local public high schools in Palawan, and this corporation in Manila speaking about it with doctors, and people aren't running away because this seems to be so universal enough, coming out in these recent movies, especially these last years, where things are interstellar or there's inception happening. So I think because people are experiencing these dimensions, if we could contextualize how the brain, the mind, the body, and spirit holds these dimensions in stasis and in flux. The thing in the hypothalamus that really makes us take notice is this. It's the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So a nucleus in the hypothalamus, just like in many parts of the brain, is a group of neurons. So there would be other neuronal groups like the paraventricular, and these are like small areas. And even the hypothalamus is quite small to begin with, but then it's divided into these small areas. So I'm pretty sure you know the SCN. And if not, then jot it down. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is the body clock of the brain and of the body, and it is in partnership with the human eye. It's in partnership with the retina that absorbs light through the rods and cones that makes decision whether we should wake up and arouse ourselves into wakefulness or we should go to sleep. And then the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is in partnership with the pineal gland, which since ancient times, people call the third eye, which we also know is what sends out melatonin, which puts us to sleep. When there's melatonin pressure, then we're forced to go into the dream state where time perception shifts. I think there's enough explanation in regards to even just that when you ask people to lay down and to close their eyes, that we're able to entrain already the human brain to go into what people normally access in sleep and almost never when we are awake. So you need to ask certain questions. I don't know how you're going to ask it, but is it actually possible to experience dream while awake without that translating into schizophrenia or psychosis or autism? So yeah, you did mention that you have enough formulations as to how the dream happens. But to be able to speak about it from certain brain regions would be interesting to sense, okay, like what is the role of melatonin? And then we do talk about certain other chemistries like cortisol, which is a stress hormone, adrenaline, which is the energy hormone, acetylcholine, dopamine, all of which are going into rising and falling in waves. When I was thinking about your question earlier today, I think something that you could bring up that's interesting from from a European context has to do with seasons, temperature, and night and day. Entrainment is evolutionary, meaning it took place over a very long period of time. And all the way up until the 1800s, the human eye was very, very photosensitive to light and dark, as well as hot and cold. So when we were not exposed to artificial lighting, then we were more conscious of the natural rhythms that allowed us to be on Earth a lot more organically and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering loudly, like what happened when the human eye started to entrain itself to not just artificial lighting, but also electronic media, electronic mediums, gadgets, devices. I think one interesting thing that you can look up right now is that somehow the human eye is not anymore so photosensitive as other mammals and other animals are. Something seemed to have happened so that even if you remove a human being from the light dark cycle, the sleep wake cycle still kind of goes on. So that there seems to be other systems of entrainment that affects us now. It feels like we have desensitized our retina, our eyes, so that for you to really wake up and go into arousal, you actually need to expose the eyes to very, very bright sunlight. So like in my phone, I have this lux meter, and studying these, I test the lighting at night in the house or in like someone's workplace, and artificial lighting isn't actually that bright. So it seems like there are these different entrainment mechanisms that are called coffee, like for some people, nicotine, exercise, that's reprogramming, like unprogramming, reprogramming the human mind and body in a place like London. That's I'm imagining kind of this bell curve whereby maybe one way of looking at this is a long time ago there was more duality, right? Okay, when it's light, when it's dark, it's dark. But somehow we have erased a lot of the difference. Like we've erased the gap or the line dividing night and day. And what was it like a long time ago for human bodies, which is still our legacy, to have been exposed to no heating, no, there were none of these comforts. And like in London, like how many times a year can you actually eat strawberries or bananas, or even bananas, like now people have access. There's this instant feedback mechanism that's holding both polarities, both ranges. So the autonomic nervous system needs to be understood from something that's accelerating even more and more. And I feel no one's really talking about this, maybe because it's not being experienced in a mirroring system enough. We're not, we're just consuming, we're just ingesting a lot of things, but we're not aware of what it means to hold light and dark, and this you can relate to inner dance, because that is the technology unto itself. Like vibrationally, we're holding delta gamma or theta beta at the same time, bringing people into this mind or brain model that for us is quite clear enough. I think, okay, so going back to that, I think you need to be clear as to what we are contributing as an experience, like in terms of why it's happening. It might seem hackneyed. Hackneyed means we're overused, like because we were talking about it for so long. The simultaneous co-activation of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. To point out that that's actually been quite rare historically. And it's only now through different psychotropic mechanisms, whether it be things people ingest that's, that grew from the cow poop, or certain vibrations or certain spiritual modal practices. This is not so, it hasn't been talked about what time perception has to do with the simultaneous co-activation of these. And this has been our framework for a long time. So talking about the hypothalamus in this way would at least help you to centralize a lot of these concepts in a cross-conceptual thinking mode, so that we are actually altering the clock. We are actually altering time perception. And everything else seems to change whenever we go into these other dimensions. This is my general thoughts. Beyond this, I was thinking what we experienced with Lisa and Josh last year was influential globally to understand the story of what happened with Josh. I had to go back to it today. Okay, I was thinking, okay, when did that happen again? So it was in October. If I remember it right, I think it was in October. Lisa can correct me. So a lot of the feedbacks came through the use of the music through November, maybe up until December. I don't remember. So this is usually when emotional, physiological, and cognitive disorders do arise, through autumn, going into winter, going into the research. This is when a lot of problems do start to come, when it gets dark and cold. So it feels like sound could have these powers of balancing everything from temperature to like what else? Like metabolism, immunity. So I think that's why the sleeping playlists are important, just as these experimentations in the prisons and the schools are important, because we are experiencing inner dance beyond the general framing of just asking people to lay down and putting on the music while they're awake. I think some of the story around what Lisa had helped to initiate is really important, because that's a proof of concept, and that's localized. That happened in London. And there's a lot we don't know about that, but it's true. It what happened did happen, and we could just not look at it, or we could look at it. I think there's something specifically there in London that wanted that to be looked at. That really does point out that we are looking at the circadian rhythms and how it's shifting in general. So I think just to bring, just to remind us on what was there in the first place. This is going to be messy because this is coming from having used this. At least the drawings are there. This is 8 hours of sleep per night. The whole point being, it takes so long for the human mind, body, and brain to achieve long REM state. right? It happens on the last 2 hours when we establish REM. So we need to at least understand the power REM has on healing, metabolism, and immunity. So my theory on why the Josh thing was happening is exposing a child or an adult to the waves whilst asleep actually brings the REM state closer and longer to the early hours of sleep when let me see this is important, Tom. This is not so complete, but you would want to look at the waves of certain neurotransmitters. Like here, when you look at melatonin um, rises up highest at 3 o'clock in the morning. So this should be when we are at the most in the dream state, and cortisol falls down around this time and starts to rise up right when we're waking up in the morning. So I think something to look at, especially in places where there are these graveyard shifts, people experiencing sleep and circadian rhythm disruption. That's a new term, SCRD. That's a new disorder, sleep circadian rhythm disruption. People working the night shifts, people who are having insomnia. I'm pretty sure in a place like the UK and London, there are a lot of people who aren't sleeping normally. To give them just new perspectives and something that's not alien. Not to talk about like going into outer space and like, but what do we all share? We all go to sleep, and now something's changing, and it's called the dream time. So how could you make them more curious? How could you make them ask questions, and how would you present that this could, in fact, maybe help, right? So I think what I gave as a possibility a few paragraphs ago is you need to bring evolution into the picture, especially let's say a neural Darwinism or a techno Darwinism, where Apple computers and World Wide Web and ChatGPT is accelerating some form of change. And if we're not going to experience these changes only while we're conscious, how are these changes actually happening when we go there, where we go, when we go, where we go? Okay, so this, yeah, I think this could be enough to see if you have any ideas, questions, if this helps. Other people might have some interesting things in to look at. Tom, you first.
I would quite like to try to clarify what I heard from that and what I understood from that. And it's so the hypothalamus is like a key component. The way that we layer sound affects the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus regulates things, lots of things. Hypothalamus is very important. Let's say regulates lots of different things. The way that our lifestyles have been going, it's very disruptive to the body's circadian rhythms, which has created a kind of a disjoint or a disjunct. It's like we're confused. We don't quite know how to be connected to a natural rhythm, which maybe inhibits maybe a natural information flow about how to be in the world, how to live a life, because our circadian rhythm, our internal rhythms are being disrupted in some way. And so when we use inner dance, we're using sound to it seems like we're using sound to do a lot of different things in the inner dance. It seems like we're kind of disrupting the entrainment that's already there.
Mm.
So like I guess like the opposite of the natural entrainment, whatever it is that we're doing now with our current lifestyles, is in training the brain a different way that's disconnected from something essential. Maybe you could say it like that. And so when we layer the sound in the inner dance, it's kind of disrupting that. I don't know if I use the word unnatural.
Yeah.
But it's disrupting that that kind of entrainment and bringing us back to like a more connected entrainment, which would be like one based on natural rhythms, natural circadian cycles. I think we talked about that privately a little bit, how it's like connecting people back to their like natural circadian rhythms helps them to like tap into that kind of deeper intuitive body wisdom. And like I suppose in some ways, thinking off the back of something I was listening to today, it's like it brings them more into a harmonic with like a more kind of a planetary rhythm, which then helps them to feel more vital, I guess, purposeful, connected in some way. So it's like it's disrupting the, I'm just trying to like clarify it for my own brain.
Let me give you
using sound to disrupt that.
This is good. You've got the central core, so we can extend from this. Let me give you a few more notes so that you wouldn't loop. Going back to the hypothalamus, when we talk about the chakra system, then people try to physicalize that through the endocrine glands, the endocrine system. So then there are these color representations, the blue being the pituitary, the pineal being the indigo, the blue being the thyroid. Sorry, the pituitary is the violet. So if the pituitary is supposed to be the master gland, right, the executive governor, which regulates or manages the other glands, right? The other endocrine glands would be, what would be the orange, for example, as an endocrine gland? It would be the sexual glands, right? The gonads. It would be the ovaries or be the testicles. The yellow would be what? It would be the adrenaline system, right? The green would be the thymus. The thyroid would be the blue, the pineal, the pituitary. And then the pancreas, I would assign to the red because that's digestion. So when I bring this up now, what's interesting is a lot of these are actually part of an axis. So when you think about I don't want to lose you, but when you think about the thyroid, what manages the thyroid is the pituitary, but what manages the pituitary is the hypothalamus. So you can look this up. Like there's something called the hypothalamic pituitary thyroidal axis. And then what manages the adrenaline system is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Might need that written down.
Okay, I can send those to you. But just to help you understand the central role the hypothalamus holds. So going back, for example, to the thyroid gland, the thyroid is in charge of metabolism. So if there is something quite pressing for the hypothalamus to be taken care of, then metabolism levels get shot and we experience a dysfunction. The thymus, which should be the endocrine system behind the heart, would be in charge of immunity. And when that is dysfunctional as well, then people get sick more. So that's still quite heavily implicated with the hypothalamus. So what's interesting that's quite recent is when people think about emotion, they assign the amygdala to that. Like people who have very sensitized amygdalas are very emotional, shy beings. But it's only very recently in the last years that people had realized that emotions, and especially fear and aggression, is actually stored in the hypothalamus. So what I feel could be an interesting research would be when people are able to confront fear, to let go of aggression, then this is just based on my experience, then the thyroid comes back online, the thymus comes back online. But I think in a place like London, in many cities, people aren't able to rest and digest very well because they're holding too much cortisol. There's too much stress hormone running through. And what does that is still the adrenal, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And so we would have to maybe think about how is this all clock based? The clock is what manages energy. So you can't exactly be super focused the whole day. You need to drop down at one point. You need to rest. So the circadian rhythms for me is an energy management strategy. The body is conducting and it's just severely stressed out. And so I think people aren't sleeping right because when people are sleeping, when there's too much cortisol in the blood, then it's very hard to rest because we're holding a lot of stress, and the sympathetic system is just contracting the cells. It's not opening, which is when healing actually happens. So if people are holding fear in the exact place that's actually also managing the clock and managing everything else that's autonomic, from digestion to metabolism to immunity, everything starts there in terms of how we perceive dimensions and time. Is it smaller or is it like expansive? You travel to a warmer place, your clock naturally just shifts already, which is why people probably do it. So if people don't need to jump on an airplane, if they could lay down, if they could actually manage their time perception and go through dimensions through something less invasive, expensive, and harmful to the environment, like fuel for airplanes, like why not, apply this to systems?
So can I
Yeah.
quickly clarify something then? So managing time perception is quite key within the inner dance. So like when we're using sound, we're changing people's time perception, which allows them kind of space, I suppose, as they move into that kind of time dimension and expand it. It like creates space, which then lets their body come back to like a natural healing rhythm.
Well, then think of music. Think of different types of music that have erupted throughout history, from the Beatles to Elton John, just localizing it there. The Who, then Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. Music has been changing, and music has been creating these different dimensions. Every sound holds a rhythm because music by design organizes time. Rhythm organizes time. So I think it would be interesting then for you to add that different forms of music actually bring people into different types of experience, including in the inner dance, where you actually have in your capacity the ability to take people either into very emotional, very personal, very cosmic dimensions, depending on how you trigger the brain to hold either localized or a generalized spreading of activation throughout the 5 brain lobes: the occipital, the temporal, the parietal, the frontal, and the insular cortex. It depends on the intentions that are being held by the space holder. So some people don't actually even experience time, they experience space. They describe the space where no time exists even. I think that's kind of that could be interesting because that would bring about a programmability or something close to how AI people would perceive the brain. Yeah. So I think there would be more to do with AI later on. I don't know how much you would be able to hold. I'm not a mathematician, but there's something about the intuitive algorithms that the brain manages. And this is knowable only by people who've held the space for a long time. There are certain techniques that we do. For example, normally in music, you don't really change the tempo. There's something we're doing by holding contrasts between slow and fast, multi-layered or not so many layers, that seems to hold these effects, that is not like doable in normal music. So I think there's some things algorithmic that could be talked about, how the brain plugs in the things that it hears and then doesn't hear, so that the difference between varieties, the diversity of brain waves start to hold like a spectrum somehow. This is why I brought up the Fourier transform, primarily as different. When you hear a music, what you hear is like the whole song. You hear the bass, you hear the drums, you hear the guitar, the vocals, but there's something deep or in depth in the human brain that can actually hear all of these things apart, because they all have corresponding brainwave activations. So the algorithms there would be how there would be, look this up, it's called cross frequency coupling. Okay, so when you hear like let's say very contrasting vibrations or sounds, you would find the average. This is what people normally call resonance. So that when you have two sounds that don't sound alike, the more you hear them, the more you'd find a kind of a middle space or a space in between. So in the beginning, and I think you've been experimenting with new music there as well, some people find certain sounds uncomfortable, and then the more they're able to lay down to it, they acclimatize to these different states that were quite hard to sit with in the past, so that there would be another kind of algorithm that would be the new norm somehow. There would be these evolutions or stages in every community that would start out with maybe something more emotional or something more energetic, and then somehow that shifts into more information, more dream within dream awareness that holds like a lot more abstract and concrete elements. That's like an energetic literacy almost. So it could be interesting to understand as well the journey of the brain that's learning to act, to like, what's a loosey brain that begins for, let's say, 3% to 6%, 7%, 10%, 20%. So how are we now in conversation with DJs, music producers, music companies, in terms of what music might look like in the coming years? Not music that's just being produced by musicians, but that the energy body itself is providing feedbacks, so that we're learning to create the very music that the experience itself is like producing. Because everything we've been using didn't really come from us. It's always been it's the energy was there, and we just found the music that matched the very frequencies. So I think that there's a little bit of theory in that, but I think enough of a description as to what's already happening globally could be interesting for your audience. Yeah.
I got a few of those concepts down and got them to do the old explain it to me as if I was 11 or 12 years old on GPT. Yeah, I'm just trying to I guess like linearize all of this so I can get a clear picture of how I would lay it out to somebody if it was in a line. When they're asking like, well, what is it that what is it that's happening when you lie down on the mat and you're layering all these sounds, like why do sometimes people go into these emotional states and these visions and things like that. Yeah, I guess I could probably keep going with questions, but maybe I need a bit of time to digest some of this.
Yeah, we could open the space to others who could maybe contribute to the conversation, give you some ideas, hold more questions. For me, it would be important to ask a central question, and the central question I've been asking through these is like, what is time? You know, if you have a central question, that could be a possible central question. There could be other central questions. And then, you know, is it possible to experience different time experiences and so on and so forth. Okay.
Sorry, just quickly. And there's definitely, I know when I'm working with one-on-one clients, using like hypnotherapy and things like that, get them to find the tempo of the emotion that they're experiencing and then slow it down, like really, really slow it down. Sometimes you can tap that out as well physically, but that seems to have an effect on time perception. And I'd often try to conceptualize that as, well, you can imagine that if you have a fan going around and it's spinning around very fast and you try to put your finger in the fan, it's going to hurt and it's going to be painful because it's like it's happening too fast and there's not enough. It's almost like you're kind of too big in some senses, so you have to shrink yourself down so that the almost like time expands. And then when you're like super small, your perception of time changes. I found this a lot in Vipassana as well. It's like when you focus in on the micro, you're like, it's almost like time expands and your perception of time expands in the same way that it's like an ant or an elephant might experience time differently. To the elephant, the ant looks like it's running around really fast, but to the ant, the elephant looks like it's really slow and lumbering. Funnily enough, an example that's kind of closer to me is when you see heavyweight boxers versus like the flyweight boxers, like the Manny Pacquiao's of the world. They seem to go super fast, as the heavyweight boxers seem to just be a bit more lumbering. But this analogy with a fan, it's like when you can slow it down enough, you can actually feel the texture of what's going on, and it's not painful anymore. It seems to change the response to the sensation. So instead of like a resistance or repelling of the sensation, it's like pain. I want to get away from that. It's actually something a little bit different. It's more like curiosity. Like, and there's ways that you do this with NLP as well, where you get people to think of an image that is particularly emotionally charged and painful, and you get them to expand it and expand it and expand it and blow it right up so that it just the emotional texture of it changes, and then you get them to shrink it right down as well, and you play around with those modalities in the brain, and it just seems to like change the way that people respond to those things. Yeah, just some thoughts on like time perception and how it changes the emotional texture of the experience.
Yeah, I think the juxtaposition needs to be kind of clear. It's almost there. We were in a bar because it was the birthday of the nephew of Italy the other day, and then I saw one of the most magical things ever. It's like there's a fan, and then there's like maybe a video projector that projects these images into the fan, so it looked like a hologram. It would just literally light up on the fan. And then the only way that's possible is that there's something very fast and very slow happening at the same time. So it's not that we have to be careful that we're not canceling out the fast, because I think based on theory of mind, you can't just keep talking about some of the things you've seen to get them to also look at it from how they're seeing it, where time has sped up so fast based on games, social media, ChatGPT. Like feedbacks are so fast. We'd have to think of how they might perceive this fastness and what it would mean to help them to slow down at the same time. I think what we would like to ask you, Lisa and Joanna, from who are all in London right now, is based on everything we've spoken about now, like today, what exactly is happening out there in London based on the experiences? Because you guys have been holding things regularly enough, so obviously people keep coming back. What is showing up in the sessions, the journeys there?
In our sessions with Tom and I found it, I think we've mentioned this before, English people don't move much. I had one client, I was doing a one-on-one the other day, and she told me she had a huge experience, and how I knew that is she moved her right toe a little bit. And I was like, oh, she's experiencing something great. But it seems to be very much internal, and their internal journey seemed to be quite expansive and very profound, but it's very hard, well, for me as a facilitator, to see if they're actually feeling anything at the time. There are times where I'm holding space with Tom and I'm just like, is this normal? I'm pointing at people saying, are they reacting in a, it's just so subtle. I think I sometimes miss the signs when I'm working with them. It's also I don't experience loads of people coming to the classes. They don't keep coming back. I mean, we have a couple of people for sure, but it's not like our classes are packed. It's I'm finding it a little stressful getting people down every other week, to be fair. So it's quite nice that someone else is hosting for us. But yeah, once Tom sits down and explains what's going on a little bit in their bodies, once they get their head around it, they seem to relax more. And I think also we've been discovering that breath work seems to definitely help get them into the place of quiet where they can surrender and for the process to happen. A lot of the times without the breath work, they're just too in their heads to really be present to the inner dance itself. Joanna, do you have anything to add about holding your space?
Yes, similar. Oh, I can hear like some echo. Don't know if you. Yeah, so similar things like Lisa mentioned. Sometimes people do move, and there are some like strong releases, but it's usually there are usually small groups. Usually, always new people coming. We rarely get repeats. And there is always good feedback, but we're also kind of thinking, because I'm holding space with Brenda and sometimes joining Lynn as well. What else I wanted to say something. Yeah, people usually coming and because they've been Googling something about somatics. That's also something that brought to my attention. I was like curious why why this came up as somatic. Well, we have some things like that in description, but people are coming interested in like a somatic release or somatic kind of work. So also embodiment, these things.
But I would also say, is it true that the CAP classes seem to be like they seem to have a kind of a thing going on with that? So I don't know what exactly the story is with that, or like how it's different, or what's different about it. Maybe it's just a branding thing, or I don't know, but it does seem like those classes seem to be a little bit more popular or established, and that seems kind of strange.
I'm not sure, because I've been attending some of classes, and it's similar. It's like 6 people, or I don't know, 7, 8, and it's also. I mean, maybe there is like more people like expressing like intense movement, or. But
who's the name of the cap girl that came to our class when we were doing it at Damien's studio in Notting Hill?
I think. Was it Ellie? I don't know. I think now there is like loads more people, because obviously like there is more trainings, but I feel almost like it's very similar attendance, and
I thought she was saying she had full classes before, but I guess we've also had some fairly full classes.
Could be seasonal as well. And there is a saturation point that's reached in every community, and thus the need to take things to different levels or layers. So it's hard to say. This is yeah, this is still quite new in many places in Europe. Yeah, so thank you for that feedback. So let's see if others might have. Oscar is raising his hand, Caro as well.
Hello. Hi, Pi. Hi, friends. Wow, very interesting scenario where you, Ton, and Lisa have to recheck many things from your own base and foundations, and how this is inspiring also for new scenarios for all of us. I feel that this calling can be a reference in the future for approaching to certain topics and facing possible conversations. In my case, I just want to give a short feedback. I just came out from the Oceans Week here in Mexico. I can say that was a success in terms that there's a project in a community that they are interested to using the music sensibilization strategies for owning and participating in the recovery of an ecosystem. And for sure, the music and the experience of inner dance was opening a space. I'm very excited for this. This project is supposed to take place in September, October, for me traveling to the communities and sharing inner dance and other inputs and seeing what else can happen to contribute to the aims of the project. In another hand, was presented in the performance, was presented a director from LA, from California, that is ending a documentary about the reforestation of the sea, under the sea. And well, I had the opportunity to make part of the soundtrack for the documentary. I just got hired by this. It was very nice to be in that possibility to engage in the experience that they had with the sound, with the composition and things was very moving. And this guy was just opening the door for bringing frequencies of the oceans, whales, and other things to this relevant communicative piece that is the documentary. And well, I just want to say that yes, inner dance is flowing. This title is flowing around the mind of many people, that they are interested in empowering communities, sensibilizing people, increasing capacity to respond from the heart, from the feelings, and being able to rewrite the way that they perceive the laying down into the earth, the laying down into nature, and the simplicity. I feel that it was my discourse and my key to talk to them, and not because the public was not really specialized and was people interested in environmental stuff. So this is just what I want to say. I have to go, but I was so happy for being part of the conversation. And yeah, that is, thank you so much. Thank you, Tom, for the notes. I was copy paste the things, and I will be checking the other part of the calling for sure. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing update from South America. Always happy to hear from there. Kara, you were raising your hand. Did you have some things to share?
Yeah, I'm driving, so I will like put my hand down. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Oscar, Speedy Oscar. Yes, I just wanted to add something about the holding space here in Barcelona. And in Spain, it seems also to be like a group are reducing, and maybe it's seasonal, maybe it's saturation, I don't know. Maybe also we are like it's more like integrated in the society, like maybe people going to the yoga classes, you know, like as there are like many different modalities. But I'm meditating on and maybe we can meditate all together. I don't know if someone is interested to do it with me. But how can we go out of this good old marketing, you know, like that is more like masculine, that is more like based on competition and everything, and more like not being an influencer, but more like reversing the process and getting people to join you, you know, like the affluence, like it's not influence, it's affluence is coming to you. Maybe how can we reach private circles and people that are interested in the work? I don't really know about that. I'm just meditating on this and about the process of the body. I get to hold. People are going deep in the sense of there is many manifestations, can be like movement or inner movement, all the manifestations that we get to know in inner dance, but it seems to move them a lot, like deep in the sense as it's like really strong. It's really a strong process, and people are really moved. They get to go in a like really deep, like and strong process of readjustments also. So I was curious to know if in Europe or in the world, like do you experience this with people also? Are they going strong and deep in the sometimes in the remembrance, and sometimes people are like really like so strong that they're not suffering, but you know it's like reminding them like traumas, like really deep traumas, and there is like a lot of work on it to do. And I'm also wondering how we can hold space for them, like more in the integration after the experience. I'm really curious and interested to work on this part and to find a way to hold space also for people, because sometimes it can be really like even for me, like as a space holder, sometimes I was talking to Christina last time, I was like, yeah, I was scared like someone get to suicide or something like that, you know. So yeah, I don't know if you already experienced something like this, but yeah, I'm curious to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. That's really good. That's so nice to hear from Spain. Yeah, definitely so much happening there, as I'm aware of. Every week, yeah, people write. Fanny, you raised your hand. Let's hear from you. Now from Germany.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, from Germany. It's been 2 weeks almost that I'm here. Yeah. There's so much being shared in the whole conversation, but something I wanted to go back to, kind of like starting from the point in the beginning. What I feel is changing is, or in my own space, is observing how we look into space holding and facilitating, and how language is actually changing within the way we hold space. from the experience of being in Maya in the whole winter for 6 months, and being in the school and facilitating in the prison and through the corporate and with, you know, with teachers, encountering so many different people. And then there's so many, like much more, like now Tom, and Lisa, you're gonna talk with people in tech, which is like trying to understand the many brains that people are holding and how the brain is being shaped through the language that they're holding. So using the words that they're used to in a way, and the way that they want to what do they resonate with? Like if you use IT, like I don't want to say IT words, but we approach teachers differently that we're gonna approach PDL in the prison, or that we're gonna approach corporate in a call center, or doctors and patients. So this has been like a question that I'm still holding with me. Like every time I observe something, I'm holding it to really ask myself, like, what is the system of interpretation of the people I'm talking to and of the people I'm talking with, so I can actually know that the conversation is being held in the way that I want it to be understood. Because inner dance, there's so many ways to talk about it. There's so many ways to open the space. But what would be the way that makes it like a clear understanding that the language that I am using, that I'm responsible to share to others, is the language that they can understand. So even going into like studying maybe things that they would get. And because I don't have this language and I don't need to understand everything, but I can understand that this is the way that the thinking is being made. You know, what is the process of thinking? And I think this is something I've been, it's been since last year that I'm observing how not just language in the sense of what language you speak, like French, English, or Tagalog, or any other language, but in the way that your profession or how what you do in your daily life, which is most of us work, how is this shaping your mind, and how is this shaping who you are, and how can you bring all of these theories from inner dance, which are mostly science-based and not just like mysticism, how can we bring this to people in IT, or to people like now it's more related to the call in IT or in corporate? Like what would be something they would really understand? So I think this is kind of my question to reflect on, and also understanding that there's things that we cannot really prepare for, like understanding the context where people are, like the PDL in Manila. There was, up to a certain point, something that I could prepare to share, but not fully, because I need to take the people where they are at. So this is also an understanding, like, do we really know where they're at in the sense of knowledge, in the sense of spiritual openness, in the sense of like, what would they really understand of what I would be sharing? Like what would that be, and how would it be received in a certain way? And how much am I willing also to put myself out there to share things like that are more spiritually related to mysticism, or like inner dance in that sense? Or do I go for something that is really science-based, where we can really share about the body and mind connection, embodiment, embodied cognition, and what does it actually mean? What is a trigger? What is being triggered? What is also the space where we can understand all of this that is happening, and how can we allow also a space of like for people to look into their own intuition. so they can really feel into themselves, okay, there's something out there. I don't know what it is, but I'm curious about it. So how do we cultivate a space of curiosity? How do we cultivate this space of awness, of like, I don't know what it is, but there's something. And this is where it doesn't matter anything you talk about, because if this space is being held, if it's being supported, you can talk about anything because people are going to get curious about it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share, and I'm very curious about how it's going to go. I think most of the time I've been like dimming down way more than and it's not from a lack of trust. I feel it's more from thinking people don't know, but when you relate to people in their own language, they really understand and they're really open to whatever you're presenting. So I was not surprised, but I was like amazed by how much openness I met by being in interaction in that way, because I allowed myself to just give in, and then I was received in a space of more openness than I thought they would be in. So this was really amazing to see. Okay, I think Achlan wants to say something.
Hi, and hi Tom, hi Lisa, and everyone in London. I have a personal connection to King Cross. I've been working consulting for music.
Just a moment. There's something happening with the mic that's making a sound.
Is it better now?
Yeah, it's just you guys were like moving it around or something. Now it's done. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So when I came first time to King Cross, I was consulting Universal Music there, and from the IT part. And now it's super interesting to hear that Deep Mind is there, and you guys are in the center of everything: music, tech, and inner dance. And so since I'm back here in Berlin after the winter quarter in somewhere in the Philippines, I've been also looking into into AI, into inner dance, and how can we bring this in a way that it will be listened to. And one of the things what I am really finding interesting for to talk to IT people is that the IT person or the tech people, they are really very much into patterns. They understand a lot about, they talk about zeros and ones, and that's a smallest structure you can create to create the world. And I think at the same time, what we want to always try to understand is he want to understand how the brain works. That's the main goal of the IT person or tech person who is working in this in the AI industry. And there is something in between. We don't have found out how the brain works, but we kind of know somehow, and all of things are guessing. And we have a kind of an inner dance. We have a more I have the feeling we have a more bigger understanding from a holistic view. And I think if you bring this out, people will this is my experience also talking to these people here in Berlin. People are super interested into the question already about what is intelligence and what does it mean to be intelligent. That now we are asking the question again to understand what is actually intelligence. When we compare this with 40 years or 60 years ago, we would say ChatGPT is super intelligent. But if you take it right now, we understand it is not really intelligence. So, and these are the things people are very, very open and to listen to us from an inner dance perspective. I think one of the it's really a beautiful chance you have to be there and talk to this crowd and to be center of this, to be invited. So to talk about the body and the mind and everything we know, it's already really big, and we have so much knowledge which is not known there. Because we are in this inner dance circle and we know so much, we believe so many times, oh, we don't know that much. But if you go out and we talk to the people, even those people which are top in AI, they are suddenly listening like, wow, what? This is what is happening. So I'm really happy to listening to you guys what is going to happen, but it's be free and open to share what we know already about in the inner dance. And thank you for doing this. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Tom, back to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really cool. I liked what Ahilan was saying there about the tech people interest, or the IT people interested in patterns and looking at patterns. You know, I think to reflect on what Fanny was saying as well as she was talking, I was having a lot of thoughts about it and like languaging and how to, like, what is the language. I don't know what it's like for where different people are, but I think in the UK, maybe Lisa could validate me on this. It's almost like people are kind of almost looking for a reason to write you off as talking nonsense in some way. There's like this, almost like this suspicion and skepticism, and it's a very like linear culture. It wants to know the chronological order and like the precise nature of, like I was saying in the comments there. It's like when people come to the classes, it's like, what are the rules? You know, what should I do? I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. You know, that's one of the things that we get after classes a lot. And it's like people just want that structure. And so to help them to find a place to help them to feel safe enough to let go in some senses, like whatever that means. Yeah, kind of have to provide some kind of structure and some linguistic framework that helps them feel safe, that isn't too spiritual. Because I mean, this, don't get me wrong, there's like a lot of people that are really into it, but the general kind of population is much more pragmatic in that sense, and it doesn't necessarily feel safe contemplating different mystical ideas. So like using language in the UK is really important. So when I'm explaining it, I try to stay within the bounds of what I know in general about the brain and the body. But it doesn't mean that I can't explore other areas, but I'll try to preface it by saying, here's potentially a mystical way of describing it, or here's here's like a poetic way of describing it, or here's like a symbolic way of describing it. And so you're really like communicating, I guess in some senses, everything about the process of what you're describing, but without like trying to push some particular ideological standpoint on them, or belief system, or system of interpretation. And that's something that I'm really I try to be as vigilant as I can for myself, is like, I'm not trying to push a belief system onto them. I'm trying to share with them something that's interesting for me, and I'm interested in it, and so I'm enthusiastic about it and kind of passionate about it, and that seems to work well enough. But as soon as I get the hint that maybe I'm overreaching a little bit, which is like one of the reasons I wanted to do this call, is just to try to clarify and ground some of this information. Like, if I'll start talking about time and space, like I'm interested in those explanations, but I don't know how would I talk about it. I would talk about it, and sometimes I do talk about it, but I'm trying to keep things within a framework that's going to help people feel safe enough to keep their minds open, if that makes sense, rather than is jumping off into mysticism land, which means there's going to be a certain shutdown. It's not always the case, but like I really I guess I'm really trying to hone my communication in so that I'm making it accessible to people who are potentially the most closed about these kinds of things. But like another good reference point is psychedelics as well. So like that seems to be popular in the tech center as well. It's like you start putting it in that frame. It's like we're looking at ways of using sound that kind of mimic like a psychedelic experience. You know, tech people love psychedelics because it's, well, Silicon Valley, I think, could have been built off the back of magic mushrooms and things like that. But yeah, the psychedelic experience is becoming more and more mainstream, as in like they're doing feature programs on BBC about psychedelics and psychedelic therapy. So there's an entry point in there, but it's all it has to be kind of within, I suppose, like within the remit of the system, if that makes sense. It's like, does this fit into the system already? Is there somebody on the BBC already talking about it? And if so, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I'll be a little bit more open-minded to that. We have a word that we use at work, or we have an expression. It's just called like meat and two veg, and it's like this explanation of like, what's the meat and two veg explanation? What's the simplest possible thing that you could explain it to, that you could kind of reduce it to, that would explain it. And so sometimes we'll have these conversations in the way that Andrew Huberman talks about, if you know him, he's like a scientist out of Stanford, ophthalmology, and studies neuroscience. He has these really, really technical explanations for things about how to eat really healthily and like how to perfect your sleep, and the kind of the meat and two veg explanation would be, so just eat healthily and sleep well, or like get good sleep. And it's like, I feel like in some ways British people are always trying to look for, so what you're basically saying is just get some sleep, you know, and if you can speak to them along those lines, then I find like a lot more openness with them to explore various different ideas. So anyway, that's me talking a lot. So.
From Netherlands, let's hear from Nadia. It's nice to just keep jumping from one country to the next.
Hey everyone, we're joining from the Netherlands, and it's an honor to be with you here tonight. I thought something that Tom said about just explaining enough to build a level of trust, that people are comfortable enough to surrender. For us in the Netherlands, that is what works really well, because we kind of have found that in order for them to surrender, they kind of need to know a little bit about what to surrender to. And I always emphasize that it is something within themselves. And what just a few recent experiences we had with people who were more science-based really got me thinking that, for instance, we had a neurologist in one of our sessions. Like once a month we do a session and we team up with partners that have a lot of business people attending. And then there's 20, well, you know, lawyers, doctors, managers on the floor, on the mat, and you know, they go for the experience. And it was very interesting that the neurologist actually said to us later on that she kind of knew what was happening, because a lady next to her was feeling like really nauseous. And she said, oh, this could have to do with this part and this part and this part. And it really got me thinking that, you know, for instance, if someone knows how to sing beautifully, you know, with a voice that like really, really touches you, that person may not have the knowledge or what is actually happening to the chords. I don't know the English words. Like technically everything that is happening to produce a certain amount of sound, it like comes very natural for them. So whether we have the experience, yes or no, it does not really depend on whether we kind of understand it with our mind exactly what is happening. Because sometimes I feel that when we want to grasp it, like this is what's happening, then maybe we're actually missing the bigger picture, because it's all so connected. So if there is anything, that we or I could share, like from the background of chiropractic and the neurological system that I do have knowledge on, I will always say, well,
Yeah, I think it's them. Nadia, I think you guys are. I think it's their signal. Interesting. Cliffhanger. We could wait, or it doesn't seem to be. Yeah, they dropped off. Yeah, I think that's a lot of that's interesting. It's just the context that I think we're listening to where Dom is coming from. It's not I can't come in with Buddhist explanations or, like a power of now, Eckhart Tolle type of stuff. That's relatable to other contexts and other situations. I want to maybe bridge a little bit where Paul was coming from. It feels like they're back. Hey Nadia, sorry you got cut.
Yeah.
Finish your thought.
Well, now we got disconnected, and it actually sometimes I ask if there's lots of like technical questions that there are often very few people that really understand how their mobile phone works, like really understand, but we still use it every day. Yeah, that kind of like also allows me to say, holding the space doesn't mean that we need to know, the exact wonders of the human experience, because it's, part is the body, part is consciousness, part is, the experience of being alive, which is, we can think about this for lifetimes before figuring it out, if we ever figure it out. And then, of course, there's always a few people who do understand how it truly works. But like, well, you're the lucky one, but you don't kind of need it to use it. But I also thought that what Germany said, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name, but like the finding the words that help with the trust, that is something that really helps them surrender, and then the experience sometimes leaves them without words anyway. Yeah, that's usually the way we go about it. And of course, there's a lot of people who are interested in maybe seeing if there is some science that could be researched in the future. Like, can we hook people up to machines and see what is happening to them? Can we do certain readings, their blood work, for instance, or those kind of things, to really say, okay, it's not like huge medical things because they're unaffordable, but on a smaller scale, we do have an indication of what is happening. So I would find that very worthwhile looking into.
Thank you, Nadia. Yeah, it does feel like there could be, like a choice in this point where industries and communities could go. So balancing like not having to understand, and having enough understanding is always like a big question coming about. So I wanted to bridge a little bit, but where Paul was speaking from, and then what Tom was bringing to us, alongside many other movements that are interesting happening across the world right now. Something I think Laya is like possibly bringing forth here now that can be studied and talked about is how okay, so in inner dance there are many possibilities. Like I've been watching bodies for quite some time now, and when I say bodies, I'm talking tens of thousands of bodies going through all kinds of experiences. There was a reason why I did not choose to stick to one type of experience, the type of experience that's becoming quite popular now and the norm. I'm interested in other experiences as well, outside of that context that's spread out. So I was talking to Paul in a cafe, crepe place in Manila, and I just read this interesting book. The topic of the book was about the what happens to the brain when we read. I've been really interested in language, the evolution of which either is through spoken language, through written language, language of the body, light language, because there are multiple languages, just like there are many intelligences. So in the experience, often some people would just go into the energy where nothing means anything. There's absolutely no meaning. They could see colors, they could feel the emotion, and then they come away with zero insight, like zero actual, but they feel good. So a lot of the time, the topic there was about how people might actually get addicted to the dopamine hit that simulates the experience is very, very body based. And later we started to understand that a lot of those experiences were happening in the temporal and frontal lobe. So that especially when the body moves, I mean, listening to Tom is one of the, he comes from way back, from when inner dance was just starting. So the first teacher training video I made, he was there. This is 2012 or 11. I don't remember. Maybe Tom would remember, maybe 2010. That's when the body, 2012, when bodies were moving. So then we got interested in the experience where bodies weren't moving, but vision started to appear. So those are two things: the body movements, which has a lot of energy and emotional quality about it, and then there's the visions. So I remember talking to Paul about this one interesting insight, where when you study the brain that's watching the image, an image that doesn't mean anything, and very often images appear in the journey. When the thing you look at doesn't mean anything. So let's say you're looking at a bunch of letters and they're jumbled in a way that they don't actually make sense, then it's really just the occipital lobe, like lighting up. And for that thing to start to be meaningful, there has to be a greater spread throughout the temporal lobe, where sound and image starts to come together. So then suddenly, let's say you arrange the words that didn't have meaning because they were jumbled together, like in Scrabble, like say OUSHE is jumbled, so it's HOUSE. somehow the meaning jumps up at you, and suddenly there's an insight, like connections are being made, and an intelligence arises. It's not just body-based, not just energetic, not just visual, but becomes more semantic, more clear, more exact, more layered, and is able to hold abstract thought, not just concrete. And I think already you're wording out that in London, people are too much in the literalizing the concrete. So to bring people into like metaphorical thought is what I call it, like to be able to perceive something not from a judgmental point of view, not just from seeing things as what it looks like, but actually from a non-judgmental yet deep feeling, deep aware, slow thought yet vibrating fast kind of thinking. Like based on my conversation with Paul, this is the kind of conversation we're having with the school in Palawan at the moment. So for those who are not familiar with the project that we're focused on right now in the Philippines, right before we left for Europe, we signed a contract with the Department of Education that we are set to construct school systems within the Puerto Princesa district space. So we're talking about, let's say, thousands of schools in Puerto Princesa are about to bring in inner dance as a curriculum for teachers and principals to understand how learning could happen more integratively using technologies within music, art, and healing, and also science, so that what began as a very mystical experience a long time ago is actually now beginning to enter the system. And so this really seemingly basic understanding of how meanings are formed in the brain. I think what Nadia was speaking to was more of if people are kind of sick with present meanings and then they need to stop for a while and say, okay, this doesn't mean anything, so I need to take a break and empty out. In a lot of cities, especially in the West, there are many movements where people need to go through the stage of not having to address this through logic, through the intellect, through through analysis, through but then there would be these other applications in other places in the world where meaning needs to be like clarified. And these would be places in the world, especially that they're colonized, that didn't really access education systems as many people around the world have had enjoyed, so that critical thinking and abstract thought is very easy to come into. So intelligence still would be, I think, interesting, especially as AI is the topic right now. How could this be contextualized to the exact audience that Tom is speaking to? So multiple, like authentic intelligence in relation to artificial intelligence might be related to multiple intelligences. And based on how we were educated, based on how we were brought up, there is a separation between intelligences. So there is a reason why there is an attraction to embodied intelligences and emotional intelligences and vibratory intelligences, non-linear, like interstellar, cosmic, quantum, whatever. So I think this would still need to come into the fore. Like if technology was to still do something, because right now people are using media and they're not just using media, they're being used by media. Just like we're using the brain because of the addictive brain, the brain that is consumptive, the brain that is also avoidant, the brain that has many, many escape routes, that bypasses, that tries to think faster than it should, that doesn't know how to achieve slow thought. This fast thought is very available right now, including in the energetic realms. I've been just watching people go faster in thought, and then that could very much be judgmental thinking as well. And there is spiritual judgment that's very, very available, where things just get black and white, and we think the things that are easy to think, rather than be able to slow down and listen to how the species, the earth, consciousness itself might perceive something if given the space. Because I think a lot of people are going into this very concrete literalizing, just say it in a few words, and so I can go off and do what I need to do right now, rather than like actually sit down and come into who are we? Where are we coming from? Like what are we if given the space? And this is a lot where this energy comes from to begin with, like anyone who had been given the space and time to reflect on how old we are and what is the source. That's not just a religious explanation or a superstitious or a mythologizing way. Where would the human evolution come about? So I don't know. It's just so multifaceted how even people in tech may need to get in touch with what is any and all of this even for. Like, what is technology redefined from the most holistic, most integrative way? So I think we're walking around with these machines, these circuitries, these chemistries, and for a long period of time, it was growing in us in a way that we think we're using it, but it actually used us. We're just the vehicles upon which it could. But then if we are kind of laying down to this, and there is an evolution, like circuits are firing, wiring, interconnecting, what would we use it for? I think, yeah, you have an hour and a half. I've had a lot of people from Silicon Valley come in the past asking certain questions about what is going to be the technology of the future, given that the real technology is so accelerating in its growth process. I do believe there are actual answers to some of their questions, but those were asked many, many years ago, say 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And I would love for a lot of those questions to be asked now, based on what we've seen over 16 years of experience of this. So I think with Tom, you have seen a lot. So I agree with Fanny and Ahilan. I've been watching you go into extremes of no fear and just and at the same time, I've always seen you in what you call perception architecture, the blueprint of consciousness. But I was listening to you today, and I feel like you're channeling a lot of what's there. So we do need to listen to what you and Lisa are honestly sharing, that there's a critical point. There's something that needs to be listened to, even in the height of skepticism, the height of doubt. There's a question underlaying, like, what would get people to trust? So there are some cultures that don't need context in order to go into trust. There are certain cultures that need a lot of context before there would be an opening. And it sounds like right there, the birthplace supposedly of rationality itself, the mother lode of intellectual, the origins of intellectualization somehow is rooted there. So whatever it is that you are going to witness, it feels like you need to kind of deep dive and just jump in, like with based on everything that you've already known. So I hope you've got like some notes, some interesting notes. I hope it helps you, that you can share this there, that there are places in the world where this is already like coming into the education system and already coming into the jail system, that there are these contexts. It's not just happening in yoga mats. There are people who are experiencing these in very, very different ways. I also really would love for what Lisa experienced, or what we experienced through Lisa and her nephew. I think that's very, very revolutionary, and we've barely begun to actually understand what the Josh playlist had contributed, really way ahead of time. I think there's something brilliant, something mysterious, something deep there. I think that's pretty cool, because that can be explained more through storytelling than scientification, if I was to make up a word right now. There's something very striking about that story, considering the father of Josh is a surgeon, and the mother of Josh is, known for being in the holistic industry. So that takes some kind of lead role globally. We recently held space for a call center, one of the biggest BPOs in the Philippines. It's a global company. It's 60,000 employees, and it's a call center. It's a BPO, so it's people who don't sleep at night. They're awake at night, and the experience was deep based on the explanation. It's like people were really interested in what is now happening to us as we stay up late at night listening to the complaints of people from all around the world as they are awake at 3 o'clock, 4, 5, 6 a.m. in the morning, when they know they should be sleeping, as they're experiencing all these sicknesses and depressions and anxieties. There's actually a positive way of perceiving the circadian rhythms, and inner dance was the mirror to look at that, instead of judging that, okay, like it's actually terrible that you are disrupting the sleep and circadian rhythm cycle. So yeah, like last thoughts, then we can maybe close soon. Anyone else would like to share? How do you feel, Tom? Let's hear from Paul. Paul, you raise your hand. Yeah. Wait, you're not muted. You're muted. Sorry.
Hi guys. So I was wondering how loud you're supposed to play the sound or the music.
I think it should be moderate.
when you hold space?
I think in your case it shouldn't be loud because you're not going for a catharsis or explosion. You're going for stages of development where even you don't want to trigger. You can see there's already so much emotions in the people. So to bring them more into insight rather than just emotions, you don't want it too loud. Just right. It should be just right.
Okay. Yep. I was wondering because like how sound can be a kind of a wall and a barrier,
Mm.
and then in the environment that they're in, like being in prison, it's already loud everywhere. And then when we enter the room, I I thought it's important to keep that space separate
Mm.
from the rest. And I don't know if it works, but I just play it somewhat louder than maybe every other noise that comes in.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
It's contextual. That's a good point. Tama.
yeah. I don't know if it how it affects them. Maybe they get irritated in the beginning,
Mm.
but
Yeah, there's something there. It's smart. How entrainment works, Paul, is when you first introduce something, it will come off as noise if it's abrupt. But the more they are situated in it, so let's say it could be like a sharp sound, and then you take it away, but when you keep doing it, it actually becomes a rhythm. But if it's just like just that one sound, but when you follow it up, it starts to hold a dimension. So there is a technique to introducing like something, anything, and then you take it away and then you put it back or you sustain it. The more people are able to stay in it, there is a spreading of activation on certain brain areas. So there is a technique to making it louder and louder, but it does need to be softer in the beginning, just so they can slide into the trusting space rather than because when you do just work on a trigger, if they just get triggered, then it could be that they're just anxious and they might hold that
okay,
anxiety translating that into the art. So understand the nature of the wave. I'm sure Fanny's gone over this a little bit, and it doesn't have to be the musical style. Just the volume starts very light, and then it rises up, and then it can fall again. It could rise up depending on your intuition, your observation. I think you're only doing it for 30 minutes, so you'll know this through experimentation, to
okay,
experience.
okay. Thank you. Oh, just another thought while you were talking about the tech of the future. So, have you read Blade Runner?
Hmm.
In Blade Runner, they use a mood organ. They call it like the Penfield mood organ, and then you can make adjustments.
Hmm.
What if the Penfield mood organ is I don't know, like sound, like like
Hmm.
some frequencies you can't really hear, but something like that.
Hmm. I think this is what we're talking about definitely now with even the music companies, like how to design that all the instruments are mood organs. It's just a way of
Yeah.
teaching people how to achieve the mood. Mm, yeah. Cool. Interesting.
So yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. Maybe that's
Yeah.
all for me.
It's pretty late there. Thank you for staying up, Paul. think it's
You're
3 o'clock.
welcome, and thank you, Pai. Guys, thanks. Until next time, yeah.
Yeah. And
I
keep
enjoyed the
us
session. Okay, yeah, thanks, guys.
updated in the project for sure.
I will. Thank you. So, is it a good night?
Yeah. Go ahead if you
Good
need
night,
to,
guys.
and then we'll close from our end. Okay. Good night, Paul.
I'll stay until we close.
Okay. See you again. Would anyone else like to say anything? Otherwise, we'll let Tom close the call based on how do you feel now?
Well, thanks a lot for that, Pai. There's a lot to reflect on, I think, and a lot to. I still feel this pull to want to linearize still a lot of things, but actually, I find what's interesting is when I open my mouth and speak about it, it tends to come out. It's like I tend to speak very non-linearly, and it seems to just happen on its own. And so I feel quite confident in that, in my ability to do that. Yeah, I guess it just feels like an ongoing research, and there's always going to be stuff that is on the unknown side of things. But it's really useful to keep continually trying to ground it and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And yeah, I'm dead curious to see how it goes in London with the DeepMind people. I find it amazing that has come to be, and yeah, I guess we'll see. I'm really interested also to keep in the loop about what's happening in the prisons and things like that. It just seems like it's a really cool project. But yeah, I'll keep people posted on how it goes if anything new or interesting comes up. And yeah, thanks again for all of your time, for listening, talking, asking questions, etc. And Pai for all of the sharing.
Amazing. Okay, so let's all unmute and just say good night. I think it's definitely good night for everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Hi,
everyone.
amazing.
Good night.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye. Thank you. Good night.